Hello and welcome to day 3 of our daily reading plan. Great to have you with us today. We are going to be looking at Genesis chapter 6 to 8 and Luke chapter 3. Feel free to pause the video right now if you would like to read through those passages before I get going here. So our Genesis passage takes us into the story of Noah. And I'm not going to say much about this today. There wasn't much that kind of jumped off the page at me as I was reading today. But there's a strange little passage at the beginning of the Genesis reading that talks about the sons of God and the daughters of men and how they were kind of getting together, and there were giants in the land. Now, there is not a lot of information for this strange little section in Genesis. So there's not a ton of information that we can really use to flesh this out. But what I want to lift up is that these are ancient stories that have been collected and included in this very early section of Genesis. The stuff that happens before we get to Abraham is kind of out of time. Abraham, we can start tying it to actual places, and we can start fitting it into our historical timeline. Within a couple hundred years, we can kind of figure out where Moses and Abraham fit in. But this stuff with Noah, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, this goes beyond our historical timeline. And one of the things for us to think about is that there are passages, especially in this oldest section, that really reflect some of the other religious traditions. If you think about Greek mythology, Zeus, Jupiter, depending on your Greek or Roman background, there were stories of the Greek gods coming and having relationships with humans. And, there were children that showed up. Anyone who watched Hercules, the Disney movie, would know about this. This is a passage that perhaps reflects some of the other religious traditions that some of the people around Israel had at the time. So it is interesting to go through some of the most ancient sections of the Bible, because sometimes we see little glimpses of some of the other stuff that was going on at the time. The one thing that I noticed today about the Noah story, we've all heard about how God felt that the evil was out of control and he was going to bring the flood. But the reason Noah was picked out to be saved, Noah and his family on the ark, is it says Noah walked with God. Now this reminds us of Adam and Eve walking with God in the garden. And we're going to be reading about other people who have walked with God as we go through the Bible. I think this is an important thing. It keeps coming up in the Bible. And so I think the question for us today, the challenge is, how are we walking with God? Are we regularly walking with God? Is God part of our life every day, every hour? And I think Noah is one of the role models that we have for trying to bring our life into alignment with God's plan and walk with God more regularly. Skipping ahead to Luke chapter 3, this is the story of John the Baptist. And we're talking about the ministry of John right now. And John is a weird dude. He wears strange clothes. When he was born, he was kind of set aside within the Jewish faith. He wasn't going to eat certain things and drink certain things. And he's out in the wilderness and he's kind of yelling at everyone. But one of the things he says that I think is really important for us to hear today is, it's your life that must change. This isn't about going and changing the whole world. This is not, my life will be better when something else is different. This is, if something's screwed up, what is it in my life that needs to change? He said, what counts is your life. Is it green and blossoming? If it's dead wood, it goes on the fire. Now later, Jesus is going to be talking about a fig tree that's going to be cut down and burned because it's not bearing fruit. So again, there's an echo here. There is something that's important because it gets repeated. Is your life bearing fruit? Are you green and blossoming, or is there something you need to change? Perhaps you need to walk closer with God. Jesus has a couple other parables, a parable of the talents, where a master gives money to some of his servants, and some of them invest it while the guy's gone. One of them just buries it to save it, but doesn't earn any interest on it. And then there's a seed sower who is throwing seeds around. And that one also talks about a return on investment, that the good seeds planted in the good soil will return 30, 60, or 100 times the investment. I think when you look at all this together with John's teaching, God is wanting us to blossom, to grow, to flourish, to thrive, for God's investment in us to generate more in the world, more hope, more love, more grace. God is investing in you. Are you walking with God so God's investment is growing? And is your life reflecting God's goodness and life? Now, the crowd that is listening to John, and a lot of people come out, and it's kind of like going to watch, driving by a car wreck, and we're all kind of rubbernecking. We go slowly. Some people go to listen to John because he's entertaining. But John really is challenging them, and the crowd is like, well, what do you want us to do? Okay, you want us to change our life. You want us to be green and blossoming. What do you mean? And John gets really specific with them. Now, the crowd doesn't really like this, and we're probably not going to like this either. This is probably not something we want to hear. The first thing he says, if you've got 2 coats, give one away. Give away half of what you have. Now, I've known Christians in this time period, in our time period, who've done just this. They've gone through their house and they gave away half their clothes. They gave away half their toys. They gave away half of the stuff. And you know what? They still had plenty of stuff. They still had plenty of stuff. He said to the soldiers, be aware of healthy boundaries. Don't be corrupt. Don't blackmail people. He said to the taxmen, be honest. Don't be corrupt. Don't steal from your neighbors when you're collecting the taxes for the government. What is it, if John looked at our lives, that he would say to us that we're kind of on the gray area of our lives? Are we honest? Are we respectful? Now, one of the things that I think is really interesting as you look through this list from John the Baptist is that none of this is about sex and relationships. And I bring this up because right now there are a bunch of religious leaders that seem to really focus on our relationship, our personal, intimate relationships, and our family structures. And they have a message that our personal holiness comes from the types of relationships that we have in our lives and the structure of our families. And John doesn't mention anything about this at all. John is talking about economics. John is talking about greed and hoarding. John is talking about respect and dignity and compassion. How do we treat our neighbors? How do we use our position to affect the people around us? Now, Jesus builds on this in his great compassion in Matthew 25. Jesus said, did you feed the hungry? Did you visit the lonely? Again, he never asked who you slept with. He never asked who you married. He wanted to know who you took care of in your life. John focuses on being honest and giving generously from the resources that God has given you. John is offering a vision of a healthy community where everyone is taken care of. Everyone has enough. No one has too much. No one has too little. John recognizes that not everyone has the same amount of stuff. For whatever reason, the world is unfair in how stuff gets distributed. But the point of our relationships and God's plan is that those who have more share with those who have less so that everyone has enough. John the Baptist ends up in Herod's jail because of these teachings. So there are consequences for what John is saying. These are hard truths. They're hard truths for the people back then. They are hard truths for the people today. And the powers that be, King Herod, now this is not the same King Herod that killed the babies in Jesus' time. This is the son, a different Herod, of the great King Herod from Jesus' baby time. But John the Baptist ends up in jail and eventually literally loses his head. Is executed by Herod because of his teachings. So this is not the easiest stuff to read. Some of this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and some of it is just as challenging to us today as it was to the people back then. But I think it's something we need to think about, and I encourage you today to consider this and look through your life as you go through your day today. Where are the moments when you can share with someone who needs a little something? And where are the moments when you need to be more honest and walk more closely with God? Have a super day. We'll see you next time.